Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this wonderful day.
Hello.
I was thinking, actually, today while we were sitting in church, that there's something about having a sippable drink. Because I was thinking like our Wednesday night group chats and things like that. You kind of, everybody's trying to talk and get their point in. When you have something to sip on, you can sit there and just kind of think for a second. And the pipes and cigars help with that too, because
it's paused, relaxed talk.
For those of you that are watching, we made a comment yesterday about giving money, and we said there was another word for it other than taxes.
The discussion was around, and that part of the discussion was around taxes. We were talking about the system of government
Supporting your government
could be changed, but we end up paying taxes because we allow it. We end up paying taxes because we elect people into office that have raised. They've added sales tax, they've added income tax, they've added taxes for you. You could go on forever. Try to build a house without paying permit fees and all kinds of things. So that's the discussion we were on. But then we were talking about there's another word for tax when you look at it from a biblical standpoint.
Yep. So if you haven't seen that video, I don't know if this one or that one will upload first, but they'll be close to each other. So like, subscribe, keep an eye out for it. It'll pop up there. What is that word?
Well, the word is actually a Hebrew word, I believe, that means 1/10, or means a 10% or tenth. And the word we use is tithe. And you hear the word tithe within the construct of church. You go to church and they pass the offering plate and they're taking a tithes and offerings. That's what the terminology that's used.
Okay. So I guess the main question is, you see tithing happening at churches. Why do we tithe at church?
So the church would always say, and preachers typically preach, that it's a biblical principle, and it is.
It is.
It's a biblical principle that we would tithe 10%. That's what the word means, 10%. We would give 10% of our income, of our increase, to God. And the way to do that is to give a tithe, to give that percentage to the church, to support your local church, to support that body, and so on. So that becomes your tithe, is your 10% of your income to the local church, to support the ministry. And biblically speaking, that they pull that from Levitical law and a number of places in Deuteronomy, a lot of places in the Old Testament and so on, that teaches on the entire principle of tithing and how important that is.
So is that an old covenant thing or a new covenant, or is it one of those that transfers over?
Depends whether you're trying to support a church or not.
Okay. That's fair. So if you're not part of a congregational church system, are you exempt from having to give money? I mean, are you exempt from giving a portion of your income or a portion of your whatever to God?
Right. Jesus asked for everything. So I should have pulled up some scripture on that, but he says that if you desire to save your life, you'll lose it, and if you lose your life in Him, you'll save it. It's literally a matter of laying down one's life for God, for Christ. So He's asking for literally 100%.
Okay. Does He have a Venmo?
So the question is, are we talking about money?
And I mean, he's risen from the dead and he's still alive. but I don't know where to send a check to him.
Right.
So how do, for people who really have no idea, how do we do this?
And so the tradition would be, and I'm kind of grasping at straws here, but the tradition would be is that by giving to your local institutional church, you are giving to God.
Okay.
That's the representation. Wow, I don't even want to say those words. Of God, and that's as I say that, and I hadn't thought that through ahead of time. That's very Catholic thinking.
Yep.
Is the church Catholic? The church is the representation of God, the priest, whatever. Have we carried that over into traditional, like I should say, Protestant churches and so on?
So that's almost putting churches in dangerous ground, because they could almost be, in a sense, usurping God's position. If the institution, and we haven't talked about this yet, but if the institution has an improper mindset and they're more fixated on receiving funds for them,
well, they would argue, rightfully so, that they are doing God's work.
Okay.
And so they are the ones that are responsible for sending out the missionaries, and they are the ones who are responsible for helping the poor, and they are the ones responsible for delivering the words of God to the people. And so as representation of God, then you should give your money to the church, because they're the ones doing it. Sorry, we are literally have a studio in our barn, and you can hear
the chickens in the background.
The chickens just are going at it. It's egg laying time.
Yeah, hopefully it's not. Last time we tried to do this same video,
yeah,
they did the same thing, but we were right next to the coop, so hopefully this is more tolerable for everybody.
I think it's comical almost, but
yeah.
Anyway,
hopefully it's not too much.
A little distracting.
But so, I guess the question is, where do we fall in modern days with tithing to the church? Good, bad, indifferent? Is there multiple ways and avenues, if depending on the person? Is it still 10%? Is 10% not enough?
Every sermon I've heard, and I don't know if this answers your question, every sermon I have heard preached from a pastor in a pulpit is that it carries over, and so that tithe continues on today, and that we have what's called tithe and offerings. You'll hear the pastor say that during collection, because we give our 10% plus whatever you feel you want to offer freely above and beyond. But that 10% belongs to then the work of God through the local body. And so they would say that yes, it continues through into the New Testament. I'd be hard put to find it in the New Testament. The New Testament teaches very clearly that we are to be cheerful givers, that we are to be generous givers, that we are to take care of the needy, that we are to take care of the poor, that we are to feed the hungry, that we are to visit those in prison, that we are, all of those kinds of things, to clothe the naked. That is our responsibility as Christians, and that's a huge concept, both Old and New Testament, is being generous with what God has given us. So the question is do we put that on the individual, or do we put that on the institution?
Okay.
Or both.
Or both. It's a little bit of both. What would you argue? Is that an individual thing, or is that an institutional thing? Now, granted, I think we both would admit that the church should be providing to the poor, to the needy, to all of that. The church should have some communal funds to help with. But is your institution part of the church?
Well, let's back that up a little bit before we go down that road. If you look at Levitical law, or Deuteronomy, I guess it's all Levitical law is what they call it. The way God laid it out is He was telling His people that the tribes of Israel, this new nation that He has formed, He's instructing them all to give 10% of everything they receive. So whatever, if you got grain that year, 10% of the grain goes to the temple, goes to God.
Yeah, mint and cumin.
If you've raised animals, yeah, if you've raised herbs and spices, if you've made clothing, whatever it is that is your increase, it could be gold, it could be silver, it could be coin, it could be animals, it could be grain. Whatever God has given you an increase of, 10% of that right off the top belongs to God. And that is to be brought to the temple in Jerusalem, to the capital city, and to be given to the one tribe that does not have an income, and that's the Levites. The Levites were the priestly tribe of Israel. They didn't have an income. They didn't raise crops. They weren't given land. They didn't make things and sell it. Their income was from the tithe that was given by the other 11 tribes.
Okay.
So the governmental system, which was the Levites, the priests were the governmental system. They weren't just, we picture priests as these religious leaders, and they were, but they were also the government center. If somebody was building roads, it was the Levites. If somebody was, if there was judges on the council, they were Levites. If they were, secretaries that took care of the business, they were Levites. In every case, the government was the Levitical tribe.
Okay.
And so their income, the way they survived, was off the taxes, tithe of people. So your tax, if you're an Israelite, is 10%. Now, somewhere, ways you can read it, that maybe there's 2 taxes, 2 tithes. For the sake of discussion, we'll just stay with the 10. So, the modern day church likes to look at that and say, okay, now we are the new Israel. We're the church, but we are the new representations of God. So you should bring your money to the storehouse to pay your tithe. The problem with that is that tithe was your tax. That was the government.
Mm-hmm.
Now we give money to our government.
30% at least.
Yeah, a huge percentage to our government. Didn't used to be that way. Started out at a much smaller amount. Mm-hmm. Actually, I believe if you look back, the original, it would have been about 10%.
Involuntary.
Your increase. Yes, involuntary. Well, so was the tithe, in a sense. I mean, it was commanded by God. And he even says, don't rob from God by not bringing the tithe in. So that was a serious thing. On the other hand, there was no law as to, take the guy out and whip him because he didn't pay.
They weren't going to come take it from you.
Right.
That was between you and God.
It was between you and God. So don't find yourself in that spot where you're not giving it, but it's still between you and God. So it's a different system today. So today we pay our government, not a tithe, but a tax, but it's the same idea, to maintain our government system, to maintain our military, to maintain our roads, to maintain all the things that the government does. And of course, we know that our government reaches far further than they should probably, but that's a whole different topic.
Well, that kind of goes back to our last video where it's important for us to have a biblically based governmental system because mm-hmm. that's what this nation was founded on.
Right. That would be ideal.
Mm-hmm.
If only.
So, do you have to give 10% of your income into the offering plate on Sunday to be saved?
To be saved?
Mm-hmm. Salvation. That's what everybody's talking about. Do I have to know this to be saved? Which I think is a very shallow level of Christianity. Everybody starts there. You realize, hey, I'm going down a wrong path. This leads to a bad place. I don't want to end up there. I want to go to heaven and be with God. This new God that I just learned about, I want to go to heaven to be with him. So everything you question, is this required to go to heaven? Now, if you've been a Christian for a decade and your main concern is, do I need to know this to get to heaven? You're not advancing yourself to the you're still childish, which is everybody grows at their own pace.
Yep.
But you shouldn't desire to remain with that level. But since we're talking basic information here, is my salvation based on giving 10% to my church offering plate?
Absolutely not. And nor would the tithe of the Old Testament be tied to you being Jewish. You don't stop being chosen people of God just because you don't give your money. You may be robbing God, but you're still his child. So no, it is not a salvation issue at all.
Because you'll hear that preached by some, and that happened a lot during COVID. People weren't able to come to church, and there was people saying, don't stop tithing now because you still. You mentioned something there, which is interesting, where you might be robbing God, but you're still, a child of God, or you're still a Jew. It's interesting to kind of realize that the Jews didn't see the law as required for salvation. They saw the law as, we're God's chosen. We are his children. As much as they knew of eternity they would spend with him, the law was how to please him.
Yes.
It wasn't a requirement to be his child. It was, you're special because you were made in his image and he has chosen you. The first thing that pops into your head is, how do I say thank you?
Right. Yep.
That was the law.
How can I live that will please God?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Not satisfy his wrath, but please him because I'm grateful.
Not get me out of the ticket. Not keeping me out of jail. But I am so thankful. I want to know what would make him happy. And that's an interesting concept. You can either, to think that you could possibly make God smile.
Mm-hmm.
That would be fun. How do I do that? Here's how. Parents can understand that. You can have kids that you're pleased with, and then you can have kids that you're just absolutely overjoyed with. And you love them both the same. But one of them, you just know they really care about making you happy.
Yep. That's true.
And so I think, I forget the Hebrew word for it, but they don't call it the law. David said, I love your law, and you don't love rules.
Right.
But
it's nice to know how we can please God.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And Jesus left us with the same thing. He says, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Can you command somebody to love somebody?
Right.
We think of command as thou shalt do it or die. There is some of that. But when he says, new commandment I give to you, he's telling you exactly what he told you in the Old Testament. Yeah. This is how you please God.
You really want to put a smile on his face, love him, and love everybody else.
Yep. Simple as that.
And he will be pleased.
And bring 10% of your money to the church.
So if I was to say, I don't really see a congregation helping people or doing things that's pleasing to God on large scale, I think I can love somebody more by helping them directly. Is that acceptable?
And to answer that question, I would turn it around a little bit and say, if you look at the institutional church that we all, we're a part of, and most of you are probably a part of that, or at least have been at some point, how much of that financial budget is doing God's work? We talked about feeding the poor, helping the homeless, clothing the naked. How much of that budget is dedicated to doing the work of the Lord? Yep. And how much is the mortgage and the light bill and the heat bill and the pastor's salary and the parsonage and the bigger the church, the bigger that list.
Yeah, the more it grows, the bigger the bills get.
If you look at your average home church where they don't actually have a church building, they don't actually have a pastor, it's just a group of, 5, 10, 15, 20 people who
They're
meet
missing the whole
together in somebody's
infrastructure.
living room. Now when you give whatever you give, 100% of that giving goes to helping whatever the group of you decide is important.
Yeah.
Where if you go to the institutional church, a very small portion, if any, goes to doing that kind of work. And I often look at this, and we've got a little, we're out in farm country here in Ohio, and our little town, our little farm town here has got, I think somebody said at one point, like 80 churches. And I don't know how accurate that is, but it's got to be a number somewhere in that range. And if you took a number, let's just pull a number out of thin air, and it could be high, it could be low. But let's say they've got a $100,000 a year budget they've got to meet, and you've got 80 churches spending $100,000 a year.
Larger.
But just using that out of the sky number, that's $8 million per year that, air quotes, God's people could be contributing to whatever the neediness is in the community, and that should be decided by the individuals.
And again, that's not nationwide. That's just this town.
That's just our little podunk,
whole
farm to country Ohio kind of thing.
Yep. So
I wonder how far, people talk about our little town and the homelessness problem, the drug problem, and this problem and that problem, and it's legitimate. How far would $8 million go to working towards making some changes? How far would $8 million go to affecting government policy when you start talking about putting people in government positions and so on? That was yesterday's video. How far would $8 million go? Now, I don't want to switch subjects, but how quickly could you then eliminate all those church buildings and not have a budget other than helping people?
How fast could you eliminate all those 80 churches and make one? Yeah, so
I'm not sure the logistics. I mean, when you start talking buildings and how to come together and all of that.
And we're not suggesting everything go to a home church either.
No. But I am saying that if you look at the big picture in America, billions of dollars are being spent on infrastructure of buildings and payroll and electric bills and not doing the work of the Lord.
And I've had this brought to my attention a lot when I worked at my last job, and luckily I had these conversations because there are a lot of people. 90% of the people I worked with were non-Christians, and about half of them were very against the whole concept. And we had really good conversations because I'm not pushy, and they'd be talking to me about stuff and not even realizing that I'm an ordained minister. But
you should be getting 10%.
I should be getting 10% of everything they make.
Mm-hmm.
But no. They would talk about, these churches are just wasting people's money. They give so much, and they're not even beholden to paying taxes to our government. They're just raking in this money.
Mm-hmm.
And you got these big mega churches, and they got yachts, and they got mansions, and they got private jets, and they got all of this. And they see that, but they don't see outreach. But if you had a small church like ours, and everybody came together and helped a cause, immediately people are going to realize what happens, which is much different than a church anonymously writing a check.
Yeah, and I think that touches on something that's really big. When you've got problems in a community, and all I can do is pull out fictitious examples, but let's say of somebody, a family down the road that is on the verge of being homeless and have lost their job due to medical issues, whatever the case may be, and I'm just pulling out a scenario, and they need financial help in order to keep their kids in their home, continue paying their rent, whatever the case may be. If the church, God bless them, decides to help that family, that means the pastor or the treasurer, somebody in the leadership of the church is going to write a check.
Yep.
Or multiple checks to support that family. That's fantastic. Nobody knows, except maybe the pastor, maybe, what's actually going on in that family.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe what's going on in that family is drug addiction. Maybe what's going on in the family is legal issues. Maybe what's going on in that family is mental issues that aren't being addressed. Maybe what's going on in the family is sickness that's not being addressed. We don't know because we're not involved.
Correct.
Now let's flip that over and take it out of the institution. You know about a family that needs help.
Yep.
You don't need to run to the pastor. You don't need to go to the church. You don't need to go to the congregation necessarily. You can go and get to know that family and to know their actual needs. They need a job. Maybe you can help them find a job.
Mm-hmm.
They need food. Maybe you can run up to Kroger and buy them some groceries. They need rent. Maybe we can pull some dollars out of our pockets and pay their rent. But if there's a bigger issue, we can help them through the actual issue that's going on with their family.
Yeah. And
not be running it through the institution that doesn't really know anything except maybe the pastor.
You'd still pull together the congregation for things that I can't help personally.
If it's bigger or something more than what we can handle personally.
So like if somebody gets hurt at work and all of a sudden they can't work for the next 6 months, they're going to need 6 months worth of income. I can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I could say, hey, this person here,
we can do it.
They're having
together.
Issues. Can everybody bring some money together a week so we can give them a check and kind of get them through? And if you get 100 people in your network, then if somebody needs $1,000 a week for their income, and you've got 100 people, that's easy.
That's easy, and nobody then is burdened.
We're all carrying the burden.
Mm-hmm. And now you've got
but that yoke is light.
100 people, and I don't know, maybe that's an unrealistic number, but let's say you have 10 people, 10 families who are saying, you know what, I want to help support them. They're not only writing checks, but they're getting to know that family intimately. Now we're talking relationship building. We're talking friendships. We're talking helping out with the kids and their education and their needs. And I mean, the list could go on because now you've created an intimate relationship with somebody.
Like, hey, I don't have any money to give because our finances are tight because I just had cutbacks at work. But what I can do is, every Wednesday I can take your kids to church with us and you and the wife can just have a night together where you can breathe and maybe cry together because things are so stressful.
That's right.
I can help them that way. But luckily, this person over here has been blessed with, they're retired and they have lots of money. They had a huge nest egg saved up. They can kind of cover my portion of the burden of the bills because they don't have the ability to take the kids at night.
That's right. That's right. Exactly.
So we can all work with the gifts that we're given to help people.
And don't you dare, if you got $10 in your pocket, say, I'll pray for you.
Yeah.
Don't you dare.
Yeah. The prayer should be happening regardless of whether or not you say it.
You know how insulting that is to the world? When institutional churches who at least have the appearance of financial stability come to the needy and say, I'll pray for you.
Right.
You want to turn somebody away from God, that's the answer right there.
Jesus did that. When the lame man asked for prayer for healing, and he says, your sins are forgiven.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's like, well, that's kind of useless. He was like, exactly. And your sins are forgiven, but so that you may know who I am, pick up your bed and walk. Mm-hmm. And that's the same thing. Pray for them. Yeah. That's important. Bring everybody together and pray for them. Lay hands on them. Do that. And not there's no end to that. Pray and. Mm-hmm. If you're not going to do the and, don't do the pray.
Yep.
And if you are going to do the pray, don't announce it to them.
And if their need is greater than what you and your group of people can help with, God will. Through prayer, God will supply. He's good at multiplication.
Yep.
But he's not going to multiply if you're not willing to give.
Yep. Yeah, you can't just push it on him and expect him to do it all.
So the question of tithing comes up in giving. Do I believe in giving? Do I believe in supporting the needy? Do I believe in taking care of one another? Yeah.
That's kind of what we're called to do.
Do I believe it goes in the offering plate? That's a little tougher.
Now let's flip this the other direction a little bit. Let's say you have a congregation of 100 people, and I use 100 for one easy math. But two, if you're doing this, your congregation will grow. I mean, you're going to have people that are seeing what you're doing, the actual outreach, and the kingdom of God will flourish, and your people will grow. And let's say you have 100 people. That's not outrageous. That's almost double what we got now altogether. 100 people. And your community's pretty good. You've helped people. You have very few, if any, homeless, and those that are homeless don't want your help. Stop helping them.
Right.
Wait, don't cast pearls upon swine.
Yep.
If people don't want help, stop helping. But everybody who's asking for help at all, you're helping them. They're doing everything you can. People are secure. They're safe. They know if there's an issue, they can reach out to the actual church, to the people of God, and those problems will be solved in whatever way that they can. And we all feel as a congregation we need to help in Guatemala.
Right.
Then you pull up an offering to help. Or if you have,
you're doing it then as a group.
You're doing it as a group to send to somebody that none of us can touch individually.
Yeah.
So you touch as a group, and everybody comes together for those big pictures, and you send it to them, and they get to see the individual faces, and they can appreciate that. Some people will have the flexibility to go there. That's important.
Sure it is.
Now, if you have a pastor who everybody thinks, hey, this guy is really feeding us. We feel fed every Sunday morning. We want to support him so he can continue doing this. Then you can start giving money to the institution to provide a home, to provide a job, to provide a building for everybody to come in. But when you've got a small congregation, is it proper to have all of their money going to support somebody? One person to do that. There's zero communal outreach.
Yep.
And this happens all over the nation. Is that proper, or is that stealing from God?
It's strong words.
It is. And it's an honest question. I'm not accusing anybody of anything. But if our job is to love God and love your neighbor, and you tithe to the kingdom of God, and all of your money goes to a pastor, are you stealing from God? Is that pastor, without knowing it, stealing?
Yeah.
And again, I'm not casting stones to anybody.
Right. No, absolutely.
This is something we honestly struggle with,
and we need to really look at as a nation of churches.
Are we wasting the money?
Yep.
I would be happy with one church a 30-minute drive from another. And so everybody can come to that one church. We need to learn to put aside our petty differences of I'm this denomination, or I'm this denomination, or I'm this denomination, so we can't mingle. I'm a believer of Jesus Christ. We're together. Period. Not, well, you didn't take the classes, so you're not allowed to actually be a part of this church.
If you watch the history, you learn the history of the Jewish people and the ancient rabbis that would teach in the synagogues. They would argue about everything. That doesn't mean they didn't like each other.
Well,
but they would argue and fight over all this biblical stuff. They didn't have the opportunity to create different denominations because they're Jews. They're all one family.
Yep.
They had to come together at the end of the day.
And you did have that later on in Jesus' day. You had the, where
you had the Pharisees and the Sadducees
in
Jerusalem.
That's what I was thinking.
And Jesus came at them both as a group, not individually necessarily, but as a group. They were both wrong
because they weren't taking care of the people.
They weren't taking care of
We need to make sure that first and foremost we're loving God. Second, we're loving one another. If you can't say, yes, I'm loving God with everything I got, and I'm loving people made in the image of God with everything else that I have left, you don't have any right to do anything else.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're commanded to do.
That's good. That's good. I guess that sums up our thoughts on
Yeah. Now I'm hoping
tithing.
this will draw up a lot of questions from people, so we can touch on more things.
Yeah, I'm sure there's more to it.
Because again, this video, we're not preaching at people. We're expressing our opinions on things, and if we're wrong, we'll change our opinion.
Yeah,
I
come talk to us.
We're not saying we're right. We're just saying we don't see where we're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody wanted to come and do a video with us, or
we could set a table, another chair right here.
This banner goes a little bit wider. We could make this a
offer you a cigar.
Yep, cigars, brandy. Again.
No, but seriously, we would love to have your feedback, your pushback if necessary, your feedback, your thoughts. I know that this is controversial, especially if you have skin in the game. Especially if your income is derived from that thing we call tithe. But let's really look at what God is expecting of his people, and I really believe God is expecting more of us than most of us give.
Correct.
But where does it belong?
Yeah.
Can God use the money that's given to the institution to support and to grow the kingdom the way that he, is there a better way to do it?
Yeah. And again, if you had a congregation of 100 people, and let's say that's 25 families, and you were all taking care of each other intentionally, and let's say that you took that $8 million a year that people are tithing, and it was directly going into those people, you know how fast their mortgages would be paid off, and they would have so much extra money to just freely give.
Yeah.
If we could teach on not going into debt because the debtor is slave to the lender, and so therefore it's not sinful to go into debt, but God doesn't want you to.
Yep.
Then you'd have so much more money to freely give. If you didn't have 4 cars when you only really need 2, because you're giving you have no more bills. You have no more requirement for yourself. You can give everything. And I think pastors need to be preaching on that a little bit. Again, as our video yesterday, get your house in order first.
Yeah, that's where it starts.
That's where it starts. And I think we're trying so hard, even when we're small congregations, to outreach. And I think if we're too weak to help ourselves, we're not going to be able to outreach far enough. So I think we need to kind of go back to the basics. We had a really good sermon today about, reflecting who God is and things like that. But the problem is, and he touched on it slightly, if we don't know who Jesus is, we can't reflect him.
Right.
Well, I think most people nowadays don't know who Jesus is.
Yeah, I agree.
Especially in your churches, unfortunately. They don't. They know the name, they know the key words, they know the basics. I think we need to teach people as if they're children.
Yeah. Go
back to the very beginning, the very best place to start.
Back to the basics.
Back to the basics. Back to the grassroots.
Yep.
Who is God? Why are we important to him? Who is Jesus? And how does he expect us to live? Get our house in order.
Yeah.
And then from the overflow of that, it will pour into local communities in ways that we cannot do right now. We physically cannot do it because you're trying to help somebody when you need help yourself.
Yep. Yep.
And I think that kind of ties it up. Again, just to summarize, we're not casting stones. We're asking questions. We're sharing our beliefs and our deepest thoughts. And we're hoping for a response.
Yeah, that's true. Yep. Give us your feedback.
I think that pretty much sums up our thoughts on that.
Well, thanks for tuning in once again.
We appreciate you guys. Glad to have you here, and just remember that you're not alone.